Anyway, I guess. Welcome to church this morning. We're glad that you guys are here. I said it earlier, but can you guys do me a favor? Put our hands together, everybody watching online today. Thank you for being here. Welcome. We're glad you're here. We know it's summertime. It's officially here, and so a lot of people are going to be on vacations and stuff like that. So just a reminder that if you are out, we want you in the building as much as possible because there's something about being together. But if you are traveling, we want you to be able to do that too. And you can always watch online, catch up if you ever need to do that. I am not Kevin. Kevin was going to speak today, but he is actually sick. He's sick this weekend. And so he's kind of had a stomach bug this week. And he really tried. He thought he'd be able to make it, but just got the better of him. So you get me today, which when he asked, hey, do you mind filling in? I said, absolutely. I love talking to this crew. And so I'm ready to get into it if you are. So before we get into this, I want to do some check-ins, okay? I kind of want to know how everybody's doing. And I need some interaction. I'm going to ask you to respond. And when I say something that resonates with you, if I hit the nail on the head, I just need you to like lift up your hand and let me know. How many of you are afraid of the dark? Anybody afraid of the dark? Raise your hand, okay? A couple people, yeah. What about spiders? Anybody afraid of spiders? Okay, some people, this is your second time raising your hand already. This is fun. What about snakes? You're afraid of snakes? We got a 3-timer in Covey over there. When I was in high school, I had a girlfriend who was so afraid of snakes that she could not open her biology book because it had snakes in it. She literally ripped those pages out because she hyperventilated every time she saw a picture of a snake. What about heights? Anybody afraid of heights? Okay, you don't like the heights? All right, that's mine. I'm not a big heights fan. What about clowns? Anybody afraid of clowns? Yeah. Why? They have smiles on their face all the time. They're not, okay, the smile is because they are excited to kill you is what I believe. So there are a lot of clinical phobias out there. And yes, Kevin could speak way more on clinical stuff than I could. But I found some really funny ones that I wanted to reference for you guys this morning. These are just hilarious to me. And I'm going to put them on the screen because I can't always pronounce them, and I want you to at least be able to see it. This is turophobia, which is the fear of cheese. Anybody got a phobia of cheese? Okay. Nobody? Okay. This next one, myromecophobia, is the fear of ants. Apparently that's a thing. I don't know if it's like a single ant or just like from a horror movie, they just get covered up in ants or whatever, but this next one's my favorite, ephebephobia, fear of teenagers. I got that a little bit, I'm not gonna lie. I'm around teenagers all the time as a student pastor. They scare me. They're terrifying. This last one is hilarious, hippopotamonostrosis quipedaliophobia. No joke, fear of long words. Which means, if you get clinically diagnosed by this phobia, you cannot read your prescription because it tells you what the phobia is. That just makes me laugh so much. Here's some truth, though. Fear is natural, okay? It is biology. You are hardwired to have the emotion of fear. If we didn't have fear, then we probably wouldn't be alive today. It's the fear of dying. It's those types of fears that kind of keep us going. When you think about thousands of years ago, if there was no fear of that tiger who could eat me, then you would be eaten by that tiger, right? Fear is just part of life. But there is a big difference between feeling fear, that emotional response of feeling fear, and living in fear. And that's what I want to talk about this morning, that difference of how to avoid living a life of fear. We've joked about simple fear things like spiders and snakes and the darkness, but truth is, a lot of us are probably dealing with very real fears. Fear of the unknown, fear of your family situation, fear of your job or career, or there may be legitimate other fears that you may be going through as well, even though maybe we've kind of made lighthearted comments about snakes and stuff like that. Those can actually be very crippling fears to a lot of people, though. So there is a difference, though, between feeling the fear and living in fear, and that's what I want to talk about this morning. There is more to our fears than we think there are. I heard it said one time that you are not, if you say you're afraid of the dark, you're not afraid of the dark, you're afraid of what's in the dark, that it will find you and kill you, and you will die. You're not really afraid of spiders, you're afraid the spider will bite you, and you will die. You're not really afraid of heights, you're afraid of falling from those heights, and you will die. Like, our fear of death tends to be the root cause of most of our fears. Jerry Seinfeld, comedian, one of the best comedians there probably has ever been. And he said it this way, that studies have shown that Americans are more afraid of speaking in public than they are of dying, which means, as Seinfeld points out, that people would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. Like, they're more afraid of giving that eulogy than actually dying and being in the casket. So, if our fear isn't necessarily really what we think it is, if we're not really afraid of the dark, we're afraid of dying, then we can look at this a different way. I wanted to, if you're a note taker and you like to kind of have a title for your message, you can call this one, Are You Afraid of the Dark? And I don't know about you guys, I remember that anybody know that old 90s Nickelodeon TV show? Like, that was prime time for me. I'm oh gosh, am I really in my mid-30s? Yes, I am. And I remember as a kid watching that show, loving it because, it was kind of a scary, horror-y kind of kid's show. And I felt so grown up watching it. I liked being scared for some reason. And so we watched this show. But, if we're talking about fears and we're talking about, it's not really the dark, it's about dying, then the real title of this message could be, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like, we have to emphasize words a little bit differently. Like, is it really the dark that I'm afraid of? Because it's really easy for us, if we're not careful, to identify or wrongly identify our fears and think we're so afraid of the dark when really it has nothing to do with the dark. It's what's inside of the dark. So to get started this morning, what I want to do is I want to go to Matthew chapter 14, verse 24 through 33. And this is a piece of scripture that a lot of us are familiar with. If you're not familiar with it, it's okay. I think sometimes people avoid church or don't feel like they can get anything out of church because they may not know some of these stories. And I'm just happy to be able to be the one to teach it to you. So if you don't know this story, go read it. It's really kind of crazy. We're going to read a part of it today. But Matthew chapter 14, verse 24, some context for you. Jesus just got done feeding the 5,000. Many theologians, scholars, historians believe that number is way higher. It's more like 15 to 20,000, just because they didn't do a lot of counting of the women and children and stuff like that. And so you had 5,000 men, could be triple that number. So he's tired. Jesus is tired. It's been a long day of ministry. He's been doing a lot of ministry lately, traveling to a lot of different places as well. And he tells the disciples, hey, we're going to take a little bit of a break. I want you guys to get in the boats and go to the other side of the sea, and I'll meet you over there later. So that's where we pick up here. Matthew chapter 14, verse 24. Meanwhile, the boat was far out to sea when the wind came up against them, and they were battered by the waves. At about 4 o'clock in the morning, I don't know about y'all, but I am not up at 4 a.m., Jesus came toward them walking on water. They were scared out of their wits. A ghost, they said, crying out in terror. But Jesus was quick to comfort them. Courage, it's me. Don't be afraid. Peter, suddenly bold, said, Master, if it's really you, then call me to come out to you on the water. And Jesus said, come on. Jumping out of the boat, Peter walked on the water to Jesus, but when he looked down at the waves churning beneath his feet, he lost his nerve and started to sink. He cried, Master, save me. Jesus didn't hesitate. He reached down, grabbed his hand, then he said, faint-hearted, what got into you? The two of them climbed into the boat. The wind died down. The disciples in the boat, having watched the whole thing, worshiped Jesus, saying, that is it. I love that line, how this version says that. That's it, okay? They pointed him like, you are God's son for sure. Again, a story a lot of us have heard. Maybe you've heard it, watched it on VeggieTales, or you heard it in kid life or in real life or whatever Sunday school you grew up in. It's a story about perseverance, faith, courage. It's also a story about fear. When I read this scripture, I think there's some stuff that we can really unpack here and learn from it. So I want to give you 3 takeaways this morning for the note takers in the room, 3 of them. The first one is this: do you even know what you're afraid of? Do you even know what you're afraid of? The disciples in this moment, just put yourself in the story. The disciples in this moment were literally looking at Jesus. This is a man that they had spent all day with the day before, feeding thousands of people, an incredible miracle that none of them would ever forget. They've spent the last week doing ministry with the man. Around him constantly, seeing him do miracles, seeing him impact people's lives and teaching them. They had spent months around him doing ministry. They had spent the last year of their lives learning under him as disciples, soaking in all this information. Yet, in the middle of a storm, when they come face to face with the man, they think he's a ghost. And they're afraid of Jesus. What you think your fear is probably not your real fear. When we were kids, my dad's in this service, so he's going to get a kick out of this, but when we were kids, we were doing like some construction or something on our house, and I think we were redoing floors or baseboards or something, and my dad had an air compressor that he had like a nail gun or something to. And so if you've ever been around an air compressor, you know that when you turn it on and plug it in, like it makes this just terribly loud noise, like while it's kind of compressing the air, right? It'll do that for a little while, then it'll go quiet, and you're using it, and it's constantly going on and off, different intervals. Well, long day of work, family's exhausted. My dad doing a lot of the physical stuff is really exhausted. We all go to bed, turn the lights off, shut everything down, go to our rooms, they go to bed. I'm assuming this was one of those kind of sleeps where like you're just so exhausted, your head hits the pillow, you're out, and you hit that deep sleep quickly. Because it wasn't that long really, if I remember right, after we had all gone to sleep, the house is really quiet, that air compressor decides it wants to kick back on because we forgot to unplug it. So out of a dead sleep, completely quiet in the house, all you hear is Now I should mention my dad has been in law enforcement for like 30 years. So as soon as that goes off, I mean, the way I picture it in my mind, I remember how old I was. I was like a teenager or a kid or something like that. I just remember my dad Chuck Norrising down the door or something, you know, like coming in like Walker, Texas Ranger. Like, I don't know if he had his gun drawn or not, but like he was like, the place, we're in a war zone right now. And he's like, what's going on? What's going on? And I guess I realized it faster than he did, me and my brother, and we're like, it's an air compressor. But he couldn't hear us. All he heard was war zone. And so we're screaming, it's an air compressor. He's like, are you okay? What's going on? Air compressor! Just screaming at the top of our lungs. Finally, it goes quiet. He's like, oh, it's an air compressor. Yes, we know that, Dad. My point is this. He was not afraid of the air compressor. He had been around it all day. The air compressor was not what was causing him fear. What caused him fear was that somebody was in our house trying to hurt his family. The disciples were not afraid of Jesus, but they were afraid of something that they couldn't understand. They thought they had seen a ghost. And my point is this: in order to overcome fear, you have to identify what you're actually afraid of. Once we begin to identify the real reason that we have fear, the real things in our life that are causing us to fear, it's not the dark. I'm worried there's somebody in the dark. It's not the spider. I'm more afraid of dying. Once we identify it, many times we realize that we have nothing to really be afraid of. It's just an air compressor. Oh, it's just Jesus. But even if it still causes us to fear, at least now we know and have identified and have a clearer picture of what it is and what we're trying to overcome. Our prayers now have the ability to be more specific. When you identify the correct fear, suddenly you can pray specifically for it. Just like a surgeon, you don't want a surgeon just poking around at your body. You want them to go in there, get just the appendix. You don't need to be doing surgery on my toe. We have to do the same thing. Our prayers are like surgery. If we can identify the problem, we can pray specifically for them. We also know the right people to put in our corner. If we need surgery in a specific spot, I don't need a dentist to work on my appendix. We can have the right people in place. Number 2, the second takeaway is to face your fear. Now, this is a cliche statement, I guess. If you ever have fear, just face the fear. Steer into the squid. Just do it. And I struggled. I told First Service this. I really struggled not to talk about Batman on this point because I love Batman. But I want to talk about Peter for a second. Peter in this story, so many times we read this story of Peter getting out of the boat and we think, man, what courage and what faith. What faith Peter had to step out of that boat and onto Jesus. But that's not how I want to frame it this morning because I think there's something different at play here. The first time I ever heard this and put it into context, it blew my mind, and maybe it'll blow some of your minds as well. But the truth is, Peter was never supposed to get out of the boat. we think of what courage and faith Peter had. He was never supposed to get out of the boat. The last interaction Jesus and Peter had was Jesus telling Peter, get in the boat. I'll see you on the other side. But yet in the middle of a storm, when Peter looks at Jesus as a ghost, Peter said, I don't trust this situation. I need proof. It wasn't Peter's courage that led him out of the boat. It was his fear that led him out of the boat. Truly facing your fear means trusting in God no matter what. Jesus told Peter, don't be afraid, and that should have been the end of it. Jesus said, Peter, hey, bro, it's me. Don't be afraid. It's me. If Peter had as much trust as he needed to have in Jesus in that moment, he would have gone, oh, wow, you're right. Hi. But instead, his fear crippled him and said, no, I don't believe, I don't trust. If it's really you, then prove it to me. And what's Jesus supposed to do? No, just stay there. No. It wasn't courage, it was fear. Facing our fear has less to do about our response and more about trusting God's response. Facing our fear has a lot less to do with how we respond to something and more to do with trusting how God's going to handle it. I mentioned earlier, I don't do heights super well. I'm not a big fan of heights. What makes me even more nervous, though, is like other people around heights. Like we've gone pre-pandemic. We'd go to China every year on mission trips, and there's this thing called the Macau Tower there, and it's like the Seattle Space Needle. It's kind of that size. I think it's a little taller, but you get up there, and then it's glass floor, so you're just looking straight down. And for me, like my stomach goes, this is not right. You shouldn't do this. But I get even more antsy when I see some of our students who are just like the most brave kids you've ever seen, just kind of run up there and start jumping down, trying to break it. I'm like, oh, please don't do that. Like, you're going to fall through and you're going to be my responsibility. Our insurance isn't that good, so please don't. But heights, I don't love heights. So a few years ago, though, me, Kevin, and David went ziplining in Branson. And we get up there, and they always teach you how to do it. They train you on everything you need to do so you don't die. And the first one's like a kiddie zip line, like it's from like me to John there, and it's like only like 2 feet off the ground. They're just showing you the basics. And so they put me in the harness, and they put the little carabiners on, and they tell me, okay, if you've ever done this, you kind of know the spill, but I tell you to kind of put your foot there and put your other foot around it, hold it kind of straight out, put one hand on the harness, but don't hold on too tight, put the other hand on your hand, kind of lean back and relax. I'm like, that's a lot of steps for me to relax 30 feet over the ground, but okay. And so they tell you to do all that, and they say it's really important not to hold on too tightly to that harness because it needs to be able to move a little bit. You need to hold on loosely. Some of y'all are singing it right in your head. I'll just move past it. He says you got to hold on a little bit loosely, and you'll have a great time. And so I did it, and we ended up doing it. It was great. I faced some fears. It was a lot of fun. But if it were up to me in that moment, my goodness, I would have been curled all over that thing. Like just holding it all the way down. Would not have enjoyed myself at all because it would have been rocking all over the place. It would have been a terrible experience. But it's because I took a moment and I trusted the instructor that I was able to do it the right way. My point is this, Psalm 56 verses 3 and 4 says, when I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust, I will not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In other words, if it's up to us, we're gonna mess it up. We are creatures of failure. It's just our human nature to mess up. Instead, we have to trust in God. In the middle of our fear, we trust God. We let go, hold on loosely, and allow God. We have to trust the harness, allow God to do things in our life. I said this first service also, but like something Kevin said back in January has been living rent-free in my head. And if you've heard me speak between January and now at any point, I've probably mentioned it because it's just impacted me in such a big way. But you don't want to understand everything your God knows. We don't need to understand the entire plan that God has for us. If we do, then God's not bigger than we are. It's good that God's ways are not our ways. It's good that God's plans are not our plans. It's good that we should be able to trust to God and not understand everything that's going on. The third point, the third takeaway this morning. The only way to avoid the dark is to stay in the light. The only way to avoid the dark is to stay in the light. Fear is represented here by the darkness. And did you guys realize that you can't create darkness? Like, you can't create the dark. All you can do is remove light. So darkness is just there. It's the absence of light. So you walk into, like when we walked into this room this morning, when nobody was here first thing in the morning, the first thing we do is turn on the lights because it's pitch black in here and you can't see anything. So you turn on the lights, and the minute those lights come on, darkness goes away. We didn't create the darkness for that moment. No, we had to turn off the lights. And that's how fear works in our lives. Living a life of fear or worry or anxiety, it's not adding fears to your life. This whole time, you didn't wake up going, I'm going to add the fear of spiders today. Get ready for that for the rest of my life. Awesome. Never going camping again, that's for sure. It's not like we're adding fears. No, the light kind of leaves a little bit. And it happens gradually over time. It's one of those things that we don't often realize is happening in the moment. We don't wake up and say, I'm going to be deathly afraid of snakes today. It's going to happen. And then from there on out, it's done. No. You may get startled by a snake. Whew, that kind of stuck with me a little bit. And then you're cautious. And it leads to something else. And the more you dwell on it, the more it hangs on. And the more you think about it, now suddenly it captivates you. It can start with one decision one day. And then a week from then, it becomes an obsession in your mind. A couple months later, now you're starting to avoid things where that fear may be. Before you know it, half a year's gone by, and now the decisions you're making in your everyday life are starting to be made based on that fear. And you get to a year, and suddenly your entire life has changed, and you didn't realize it. It was one action that led to another action that led to another action, and it slowly and slowly and slowly built up into this place where now it's crippling you, and you don't fully understand it. Let me prove it to you this morning. You guys don't realize this because we did this intentionally, but ever since we started the message this morning, the lights in this room have been getting darker. The lights over all of you, the audience lights in this room have been getting darker and darker and darker. You want proof? Riley, go ahead and hit the cue from before the service, before I started doing that. This is how we started the service. Hit the next one, Riley. This is where we ended the service. So we're like, dude, I didn't even notice. Yeah, that's the point. When it happens gradually, yeah, you notice it. But when it happens suddenly, that's something you notice. You take note of that. It hits you different. You feel it. But when it's that gradual change, you have no idea what's going on. And so there are some of you in this room this morning who are saying, dude, I don't have a problem with fear. Are you? Sure? Are you really afraid of the dark? Because it can creep up on us without us even realizing it. Fear of being alone. Fear of your future. Fear of the unknown. If you're a parent in this place, I'm not a parent yet, but I'm sure you worry about your kids constantly. Has it turned into a fear, or are you trusting God with it? Maybe it's your job situation. I did this message back in October around Halloween for our students, and teenagers have a whole other slew of fears. And adults, you've got a whole different slew of fears. There's stuff that you're going through. There's situations that you never thought you'd be in, that you're sitting here in 2022 going, I didn't expect to be here, but here I am. Has it gradually crept up into a place of darkness? The only way to fight these fears is to stay out of the darkness and stay in the light. Let me encourage you for a second, then I'm going to wrap up. Psalm 139, verses 11 and 12 says this. Then I said to myself, oh, he sees me even in the dark. I love that. He even sees me in the dark. At night, I'm immersed in light. It's a fact. Darkness isn't dark to you. Night and day, darkness and light, they're all the same. I love that so much because to God, he can't see darkness because he is the light. And where there's light, there can't be darkness. Did you know the Bible over 300 times says, fear not? And it's typically when somebody encounters an angel or God himself. But why? Why does the presence of God coming into somebody's life in a very real and physical and tangible way cause an angel to say, hey, don't fear? It's because of this next line. It's my favorite part. John 8, verse 12 says this. Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. The reason God says don't fear is because when Jesus steps onto the picture, fear literally cannot exist. Because light drives out darkness. Whenever Jesus shows up, darkness has to go away. And so it is God saying, there is nothing to fear anymore. It's not a command to say, hey, just you try not to fear. It's God himself going, there's no fear here anymore. It's me. If Jesus is the light of the world and darkness can't be in light, then Jesus is saying, you literally have nothing to fear. I am the light. And as long as you're in me, fear can't exist here. So here's what I want us to do. I want everybody, if you would, just kind of stand to your feet. And after you do, I just want you to close your eyes. Everybody around the room, every single soul. With our eyes closed, just staying in this moment. Because with your eyes closed right now, I want you to kind of, obviously with your eyes closed, you see darkness. It's not very bright. You're not seeing light. You're seeing dark. And if you're watching online, I'd love for you to do this yourself at home. Because with your eyes closed, just looking at darkness, I want you to picture that darkness for just a moment as your fears. Whatever fear you may be having, whatever anxiety you're dealing with, whatever situation that's causing you to be like paralyzed in fear or indecision, maybe you just feel that darkness has been creeping in for a while. Picture it. Put a label on it. Identify it right now. I'm not going to have you respond in any way. I just want us to keep our eyes closed for a while. Don't get in a hurry. Trust me, kid life's going to go long. The restaurant can wait a minute. In a moment, the worship team's going to sing a couple songs. We're going to go into a time of worship. And as the worship team goes, I don't want you to focus your attention on lyrics on a screen, feeling like you have to sing along. But I want it to be a moment where you're literally asking God, take the darkness away. Step into my life and make the darkness disappear. I didn't realize this whenever I planned this message. I didn't look to see what song the worship team's doing next until halfway through it first service, and I was like, oh, this is God. They're gonna be doing a song called Tremble, and it just says, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. You silence fear. So whatever anxiety you're having this morning, whatever fear, listen, we prayed over seniors and graduates. It's terrifying, that next step sometimes. The uncertainty as a student and parents in this room. You want to make sure they're taken care of, they're doing the right things. Fear can't exist with Jesus in the room. So here's what I want to do. As our eyes are closed, in just a minute, I'm going to go silent for like 45 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds. And I'm not going to start this thing off by me praying. It would be very easy right now for me to pray over you. But instead, I want you to pray. I want you to have that conversation with God for a minute. For some of you, maybe this is the first prayer you'll have said in a while. Maybe it's been a week, maybe it's been a month, maybe it's the first time ever that you've intentionally had a moment just you and God with silence. But I want your prayer to have intention to it. want your prayer to say, God, I'm looking at darkness right now. Only you can make the darkness tremble. So let's do that right now, just all across the room in silence. Just take the moment with God, you and God. I know for some of us, that silence was awkward. It felt like an eternity. I'm the same way. I don't like silence. But I think sometimes we get so busy focusing the attention on us and making noise that we forget to let God speak. So Jesus, this morning as we come, get ready for another moment of worship, we just pray that we don't get distracted for the next 6-7 minutes, that we put our attention on you, we put our focus on you. Whatever dark parts in our life, whatever darkness is creeping in, whatever we're afraid of, whatever we're worried about, whatever anxiety that we have, this life of fear that maybe we've settled in for ourselves, God, that light drives out fear. Open our eyes, allow us to see what you have for us, Jesus. In Jesus' name. Stay in this atmosphere of worship. Again, during this worship song, I don't want us to get fixated on singing the right notes. Just be in the presence of God. But I want to mention, though, that if we have communion in the back, if you'd like to take it as a family, self-serve, you can do that. If you've got a prayer request, if there's something we can be praying with you about, you can write that down back there as well. We love praying for the needs of the church. Amen. Let's go to God in prayer this morning. Let's worship today.